So why this time is the winter time they have a lot of general change the product as well?
I think because during the closure, he put a lot of things on top of the grasses. And so many of the grasses were dying, for a long time. So if you look at the grass now, it's really non-uniform. So we can still continue, but we have to put in different spots probably, just to have that more of a baseline test. But yeah, I'll wait for a few more days. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon. To explore what drives a thriving circular nutrient value chain, we need to understand what a value chain is. If you're looking at a circular diagram, and I'm going to use the Nice Hub project thing because everyone's seen this before, and it shows collection, processing, optimization, distribution, and a range of stakeholders for each function. Are you looking at a value chain or a supply chain diagram, or both? It is a good question. I'll leave you with that question and come back to it. I want to just quickly talk about market flow. So I'm going to leave you with the conundrum about the supply chain versus value chain. And I want you to think of an economic market. Most people will picture an environment where organizations and people exchange products and services for currency. What the many illustrative models of a market have in common is a visualization of an exchange of value, product, service, currency, information, and labor between households and production. More complex models will show different scales. Exchanges can be between business and business, otherwise known as B2B. Think wholesale. Businesses and people, think retail. People and people, maybe Facebook Marketplace. Some show what is flowing and in which direction, and some show interactions, including with broader stakeholders. Importantly to consider is that some exclude the broader environment in which this exchange takes place, the costs or impacts that are outside the fence. The detail at this point is not what I want you to take away, only to keep in mind that a market is about transactional exchanges. There is a buyer and there is a seller. A thriving economic market needs tension and rebalancing between supply and demand, suppliers and customers for an exchange of value to take place, and value needs to flow through the market to sustain it. A business or organisation operates in the market to facilitate these transactions. It may be the supplier, the customer, or it may operate in the spaces between the supplier and the customer, offering its product to the market or to a particular market segment. At the organisational level, the chain of activities that lead to the creation of value that is then exchanged for a product or service is referred to as the value chain. That is a hint. In 1985, Harvard professor Michael Porter first published The Competitive Advantage, Creating and Sustaining Superior Performance, which introduced the concept of a value chain. With a background in engineering, economics, and business strategy, Porter sought to broaden the view of business operations from being process-driven to considering the wider business activities and their contribution adding value to the product or service being offered. It was a significant paradigm shift, which encouraged companies to improve their competitive advantage in the market, differentiating themselves by their value proposition rather than how to efficiently produce something. While not disregarding sales numbers, manufacturing and production optimization and efficiency, the focus shifted to understanding what target customers in the market are willing to pay for. And I think we heard the term earlier today, WTP, willing to pay. Prioritizing innovation, quality, service, and value for money over cost minimization. Additional focus was given to activity-based cost accounting by disaggregating the overall cost of production into each of the relevant value-adding activities that you can see along the bottom, and then broader ones across the top of that diagram. Stripping back activities that do not add value to the market offering, The strategy was generally considered to be either remove that or outsource it to someone else at a lower cost. Given this was published in the mid-1980s in New York, it almost goes without saying that this was widely applied within a linear market, what we now commonly refer to as the take, make, dispose economic model. Just as a little aside, I wasn't going to put this in, but I'm going to put it in anyway. It's interesting to note that in 1976, nearly a decade after Porter's book, Walter Stahl and Genevieve Redday had prepared a research report to the European Commission titled "The Potential for Substituting Manpower for Energy," outlining their vision of an economy in loops. Essentially, that was the beginning of circular economy. The purpose of Stahl and Redday's work was looking at opportunities for job creation, economic competition, any similarities going on here? Resource conservation and waste prevention, all of which are particularly relevant in today's business landscape, but did not gain traction at the time. The term circular economy did not become widely used until around 2013 through the work of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Assuming flows from one of the market diagrams from a previous slide, the value chain activities of an organisation sit between the supplier and the customer, as I mentioned, allowing for different terminologies. So your producer might also be your supplier and your seller. Your consumer is also your customer and your buyer. And you can see in this very brief diagram, the producers produce product and service, the consumers produce product dollars and complaints. No laughs. As the scale and complexity of a value chain increases, so does the number of participant organisations. They become known as the value network and include some level of specialisation. Value networks can be local to global in scale, can be cross-border and cross-sector. In each, as the product or service moves from one organisation in the chain to another, it is assumed to gain value. The business and economics literature in this space uses the transactional language of exchange, particularly between tangible and intangible value, value creation and value capture, which is when you get the benefit of something that you've exchanged money or something else for. In a linear value chain, value capture points are assumed at particular transactional points. For example, a supplier captures value from the chain when they've paid for their goods, when they are paid for their goods, or a consumer pays for the end product and captures value from either the consumption, use, or possession of whatever that is. So what happens if we take that, what happens to the value chain where each process builds on the preceding one, adding value to the product until it reaches the end buyer user, or buyer customer, if there is no actual end? How does a value network tailor their product or service to a customer if that customer is also a supplier and tailoring their offering to the next customer? What happens to the value chain where one organisation or person may be both supplier and customer or fulfil multiple roles within the network? Simply bending the linear value network around and adding a connector, which in most models is actually resource recovery, is just not going to be enough. If these processes along the linear value chain are simply put into reverse gear to recover resources, how likely is it that the value each organisation along the reverse chain is capturing will be less than what the processes cost, given what value is being stripped back and wasted? Few examples exist that elaborate on how a circular value network might collaborate to co-create sustained value across the whole circular network, deliver that value, and allow for multiple points of value capture to cater to the pluralism of next customer needs. Eisenreich et al. Propose a framework to illustrate the highly connected circular value chain of an organisation to its ecosystem of external stakeholders. Activities that had been seen as supportive by Porter have been moved to the core of the system, indicating their importance as enablers. and the significance of the business transformation that needs to take place. The activities of moving the materials or product flow around the cycle sit within the ecosystem of interactions and enabling functions. They are not the primary drivers anymore. Yet there is still not reference to the touch points, connections, and collaboration needed within network partners to really work towards circular economy principles and create sustainability value, eliminating waste and pollution, keeping materials circulating at their highest value for as long as possible, and regenerating nature. Synergies and collaboration are implied, but there is a dearth of clues in the literature around value co-creation within the network and how to manage some of the challenges I've mentioned already with a relatively closed loop. If we take a look at what is different in a bio-based value chain, we're starting to include the environment as an active participant in the value chain. For the whole system to function, value needs to be regenerated in the chain after a next user has captured or exchanged value. One way to accomplish this is looking to broader cross-sector next users to participate in the value chain. We've been hearing results from some of the innovations in this space being tested over the last few days, where additional processes and stakeholders are being added to the system that also have a next user of their own. Black soldier fly larvae being fed on food waste to create protein feed for prawns. Algae fed on wastewater digestate to remove metals and toxins. Food waste being collected, dried and pelletized into curated mixtures of essential proteins, minerals and amino acids for chicken, pork and fish. Feces tokens that can be traded, potentially with cross-border value. It is only through diversifying the value network, building an entire ecosystem of business models with every scale of value proposition, cross-sector collaboration, and both economic and social participation that the value chain will be able to thrive and meet the pluralism of needs and wants along the branching pathways. This whole of system approach, including cross-sector diversity, considering byproducts from other chains as inputs, and considering where value capture points and regenerative opportunities may be, will transform not only the business model landscape, but potentially how trials and technical research is conducted. The bio-based value chain works in the same way as Porter's original, just on a much bigger scale with greater complexity. You identify the components, you analyse their capabilities, cost, benefits, look for synergies and interactions that will increase the overall value of the whole. Of course, life cycle analysis and careful consideration of whole of system approaches can set boundaries and mitigate the risk of unsustainable decisions with unintended consequences. What doesn't seem to be addressed in much of the literature is how the individual businesses within the value chain interact with each other and where the barriers are on a network scale. In particular, what infrastructure can enable the system to have a net positive impact on economic, social, and environmental value creation. So we've had a look at value chains, and to give you a fair chance of answering my original question, I want to quickly switch gears for a quick look at supply chains. If you're still awake, you may have noticed from the diagrams I've been showing, from an operational perspective, many of the activities considered in a value chain are supply chain management functions, core to how a business operationalizes the business plan. The supply chain capability to meet the expectations of the market is critical to the execution of the business model to create value to offer to the market. And the supply chain must interact with multiple stakeholders in order to manage and control the flow of product through the chain. Notice some of the processes it depicts. Sourcing, sorry, I'm just going to move on. Sourcing is from suppliers. Making is done by manufacturers. Delivery is done by logistics teams and third-party services. All of the primary and support activities in the value chain are also represented in the supply chain. Supply chain as a distinct field began to emerge out of manufacturing and operations in the late 1980s, recognizing that management of the supply networks that provide input to production is critical, and this cannot be done internally and must foster supplier and customer relationships, navigate regulatory and legal boundaries, and due to the flow of currency and exchange, must work hand in hand with financial instruments. In the late 1990s, the Supply Chain Council first developed the SCORE model, otherwise known as the Supply Chain Operations Reference Model, to disaggregate the processes that drive a supply network and develop key performance indicators to monitor performance of the supply chain. If you've been paying attention, this might sound familiar. There is a wealth of practical how in this model that has been used in supply chain management for decades and includes working across multiple organizations and sectors, negotiating and building contractual and informal relationships, managing trust, transparency, and accountability across partnerships and collaborations, and measuring transactional data to indicate whether these systems are working and to monitor material flows. Nearly got it. This model has continued to evolve, and in 2021, the Association for Supply Chain Management released the Circular Score model, with a range of processes, activities, and performance measurements tailored to a circular supply chain. I'll just note that this snapshot does not include the plan and enable aspects, if you look at some of the attributes and objectives that are there. The processes may seem transactional, but there are people in various roles responsible for these tasks, and it is people who change behaviours and ultimately change systems. My research is interested in deriving what we can learn from supply chain networks in terms of the enabling factors, use of technology and structures that will be critical for circular economy value networks, and the opportunities this will open up for new business models and new markets. Oh. Anyway. I've been mulling over the differences between value chains, supply chains, business models, and how these all fit together within a sustainable circular economy and the limitations of each. I came across this model which shows the enabling interactions between the supply chain network and business models that underpin the value network. So I return to my original question. Does this diagram represent a value chain or a supply chain? For fun, I asked ChatGPT. ChatGPT told me, in essence, the value chain is about maximizing value creation, while the supply chain is about optimizing logistics and efficiency. Do you agree? I don't. I suspect there is a lot of old information skewing the ChatGPT probabilistic answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually,